Abortion. Who has the right to decide if a woman should have one? Ever since a draft of the Supreme Court's pending decision to overturn Roe versus Wade was leaked, this has been on the lips of millions of women and men in America. Is it the woman's right to make that decision, or the government's right, or the courts? What are the factors to be considered? That's our discussion in this program. I'm Sam Taitt. My guests are Dr. Zulema Blair, college professor and chairperson at Medgar Evers, political consultant as well. Reverend James Thornton, a pastor of one of Brooklyn's largest churches, and Shirley Torho, a public health consultant. Welcome to Brooklyn 45.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thousands of Americans supporting abortion rights have been marching to protest the potential Supreme Court overturning of the landmark Roe versus Wade. My first question is coming to you, Zulema, and what is your position on this overturning of this very, very important decision?
Well, so it's a violation of your fundamental right, individual right. The Ninth Amendment clearly left some unenumerated rights, and this is one that has been used in cases such as these. The right to privacy, the right to guard, do whatever you want in privacy with a woman's body and not to burden a woman's right and privileges. These are freedoms and it's a constitutional right that's protected and has been protected for the last 50 years. And so what this means to me is that the Supreme Court, with all its conservatism at the table, cannot rise above partisan politics, which is what's supposed to do, right? That's why they're appointed, because they are supposed to have that decision capability to rise above partisan politics. But they use it as a weapon to, garner future elections. And so we see that this is playing out, and unfortunately, it's the woman's body at play.
Reverend Thornton, I know you have a strong position on this, and I should say that don't wait on me to ask you guys questions. Shirley, Zulema, James, if there's anything that one of our guests have said that you want to respond to, don't wait on me.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly agree with Dr. Blair. I think that it is a woman's right to choose. I think that government has no right to interfere. I also think that this court has been stacked and it's become political. And so it no longer is guiding in an objective way the rules and the morals of this nation. And I think that two of the newest justices were not truthful when they were interviewed for the court. Kavanaugh and Amy Barrett both said that they felt that Roe versus Wade was settled law. That left the impression that it was settled in my mind. And now they are going to vote to very much overturn that right.
Right, you said, but some rights appear to be taken away and could be taken away as well. Shirley, I want you to talk about women's rights. What are the women's rights that you are concerned about?
So thank you, Sam. So, I mean, I think for me, before we even really delve into the conversation, I think it's really important to elucidate the definitions, right? And some of what is conjuring all of this conversation about Roe versus Wade. And I think that, the nuance that I'd like to address is this idea that being pro-choice means that you are pro-abortion, and that's certainly not the truth at all, right? To Dr. Blair's point, women's bodies tend to be a playground for politics, and it's really unfortunate that that happens. But I do want us to be very clear that when folks in this conversation or anywhere else say that we are pro-choice, it doesn't mean that we're necessarily pro-abortion. We really just mean that we believe that people should be able to make choices about their bodies. We believe that people should have the right to be able to protect and to determine under what circumstances they are seeking abortion services or any other reproductive, health service, right? So I think that that's number one. And I think the second point that I'd like to make is that, historically, abortion laws have impacted disproportionately Black women, women of color, specifically women who experience poverty, women living in low income, and so living in low income communities. And so that's definitely an issue that we're going to see unfold. And, we see, particularly pre-COVID and then throughout COVID, this idea that Black women are 3 times more likely to die during childbirth. And then during COVID, it was as high as, almost 10 times more likely to die during childbirth. And so when we see the rights of women and the rights of people being attacked in this way, some of the things that we automatically have to think about is the impact that it's going to have on just women who lack access to healthcare, women who lack access to reproductive rights to contraception, women who don't have the same resources as their neighbors across towns, right? So these are, there are some really longer term, very large implications that, we haven't really addressed because a lot of these conversations are still unfolding. But those are some of the key things that concern me when it comes to, the rights of women and the rights of people to be able to make decisions and choices about their bodies and about their reproductive health.
The point that you make about the domino effect of this proposed new law is a good one, because you're going to see many people moving and quote unquote traveling across state lines as a result of this. And then the states that welcome them versus the states that do not welcome them is going to be key. Our governor stepped out and said she's welcoming them, right, with the fund, et cetera. That's if, they actually do issue that ruling. But there will be other states, because it comes down to the states that will say, hands off my states or not in my state. And then, we have other fundamental rights, the right to travel, which, was a saving grace for Voting Rights Act, et cetera, and all other fundamental rights coming into place. So yes, it does breed a domino effect, and we'll see that this precedent issue is no longer a safe issue, if you will, and this is the first clear ruling about it, or will be a ruling about it, if it goes that way.
Well, my thinking also is that it really reeks of hypocrisy at the highest level. I mean, those persons that are pro-life, they suggest that they want to protect the fetal rights. They are talking about the right of women's health, that they say that they're concerned about that. But then at the same time, these very same persons are the ones that will reduce funding for education, for childcare, for healthcare. So how can you be concerned about the baby in the womb, but not concerned about the child when the child is outside of the womb? That causes me great concern. And I think that you will see, as has been mentioned, a kind of domino effect where other basic rights to have choices as it relates to your own life, your own body, your own well-being will be taken away.
Zulema, I want to talk a little bit, picking up on what James said just now, about the domino effect. What is going to be the domino effect of the decision being made by these judges? There have been lots of criticisms of Roe versus Wade. And one criticism is that rights are not written into the Constitution. And so it's okay for them to make the changes that they want to make.
So yeah, the domino effect, I mentioned one, the right to travel. That's a fundamental right. You cannot create laws that prevent people from traveling, like residency requirements, for public assistance and long residency requirements or prerequisites for driver's license beyond the 30-day mark, things of that nature. So, but other domino effects in that realm, the right to contraceptives, use contraceptives, those are along those lines, right? Who knows, maybe the right to marry who you want comes up next. You just never know. I mean, here's a 50-year landmark decision that was right in tune with the women's movement, and then you are set to overturn it by the one that's writing the opinion, who usually is like a swing vote kind of person. But it's not that there's no fundamental right. There are fundamental rights, or there are rights specified, but what the framers did when they wrote the Constitution was say, we're gonna give you one amendment that says, we leave these rights, we leave certain liberties open, which was the 9th Amendment, which is what I mentioned previously, right? Unenumerated rights, which is where the right to privacy fall under. So I think anything within that right to privacy is fair game once that comes up. With housing laws, for instance, under attack, you're gonna start to see landlords or whomever start making decisions about who lives with you, right? When you have a right to create the family that you want, or bring up your family, or raise your family in any way you deem necessary, or right to have as many people in your family live together. It's not just your immediate family members, but those are things under this quote unquote right to privacy and family issues that now you start to see, hey, these individual rights were supposed to protect me from the government, but now we're starting to see that the government is going to be able to intrude on those rights, yet they're not intruding on any other right. So it's this political spectrum that's ruling the court now. It's this political spectrum that's dominating, from whether or not you're liberal, who are not so liberal, to the ultra conservative. So it's that type of politics. It's no gray area anymore. It's that straight down the middle. You're either progressive or not.
And it's never just abortion, right? It's about housing. It's about punitive welfare policy. It's about environmental racism. It's about, bias, experiencing unconscious bias in our healthcare system, right? All of, even incarceration, all of these issues impact people's decisions about, their reproductive, their ability to reproduce and their reproductive needs and the kinds of families that they want and so forth. And so it's never just abortion, right? The consequences are vast, and they affect essentially every aspect of human life if we're not careful. And so it's a very scary place to exist, and the lines are very blurry.
No, I think you're absolutely correct. I'm sorry, Mr. Taitt.
You're not, go on, James, please.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And the thing that concerns me, and I think that Ms. Torho was on point, because one is pro-choice does not mean that one is pro-abortion. But when you think about, I was listening this morning, I think on CNN, and there is a governor who said that he would be against abortion even if there was a rape, or the person was molested, or under any circumstances. And so that violates a person's right of privacy. And I think it will have enormous effect upon people of color, people who don't have means, people who have health disparities, housing disparities, economic disparities. So you can see a domino effect. And this all plays into that whole replacement theory concept that we are hearing about. I think it's a very scary time, and I never thought you would see something like this in America.
Shirley, following up on what you said and what Reverend Thornton said, how about addressing a woman's social and economic needs? I know that there's this divide between the Democrats and the Republicans, but what do you say as a health expert and health professional about the need for these women to have their social needs met, their many household needs met?
Well, from an equity standpoint, I think it was Pastor Thornton who mentioned health disparities, right? When we think about health disparities and those who are impacted, again, it's people who are already facing compounded effects of oppression, whether it's racism, whether it's sexism, homophobia, transphobia, you name it, right? So they're facing the compounded effects of all these intersections of oppression in their communities. And then we think about the social determinants of health, right? So things like access to education, health literacy, nutrition, housing, mental health, all of these, factors work together to produce the kinds of health outcomes we see. And so when we talk about reproductive rights and abortions, all of these issues are also impacting, decisions that are being made. And so the moment you place a person in a situation where they no longer have the choice or the ability to make a choice about, how am I going to raise this child? How am I going to access healthcare? Do I have a partner who's stable enough to help me through this, right? You're enumerating the impacts of all of the health disparities and the inequities that we're already seeing in communities like Brooklyn, right? And places in the Bronx and parts of Manhattan, across the US, really. And we haven't even addressed the issue of the southern and Midwestern states of the US where, if this ban goes into action, or if Roe v. Wade is overturned, 26 states immediately are going to, ban abortions, right? And in the majority of these states, we're talking people of color. We're talking predominantly states that house and where a lot of Black people reside. And so who's going to be impacted by these issues? Predominantly, it's people who look like us, people who are already struggling because, they're living in resource poor environments, people who are living in reproductive health deserts, food deserts. And so the issues, again, are they're very much compounded. And as Pastor Thornton said earlier, it's very hypocritical for a government to say we're banning abortions, but we're not, addressing all of these policies that are disproportionately impacting certain groups of people, right? We have, policies like the Hyde Amendment on the books, which prevent public assistance and welfare services from being able to fund abortions, for example. And so again, it very much feels like this is an attack on people of color and specifically poor people of color.
Yeah, I was thinking about that the whole time, right? If you discontinue Medicaid from paying for abortion, now we've been talking about maternal morbidity. At one time, we were only talking about infant mortality. Now you're going to start to really see low-income individuals, low-income females, their health issues really compound and really increase. But also to go back to, we often think of people of color living only in urban America, but look at the culprits, right? The state that it comes from, Mississippi and Texas and all. Though Mississippi, yes, have a large Black percentage of individuals, and it has a lot of rural areas, right? Those areas, and so you don't find, I've been to Mississippi, you don't find hospitals in Alabama and all those places, or even schools for that matter, in close proximity of one another. So where are these individuals going to go to get these? Are we going to see another renaissance here? Are we going to see another flight, another movement from the south to the north? Or, we just don't know, again, the ripple effects that these things are going to have, and it will have them, not just in, and then, it's always been, I just thought about this attack on quote unquote Obamacare, right? It has always been that attack on Obama. Who knows if this is not a backdoor to undermining that legislation that they've continued to want to undermine. So, it's a lot of different issues at play here, and they always find a way. The NAACP was clever. We did it, right? We used, again, right to travel and all those different things to create the Voting Rights Act, and to do a number of different things to create these pieces of civil rights legislation that we have on the books. So, it's a playbook that's often used, and we'll see. We'll see also the decision that the Chief Justice writes, right? How, and if they're able to just see how that political move that was done in circulating this draft, which was never done, how it may be, I don't know, do some horse trading to say, well, we won't do it, or we'll change our mind or change our opinion. And they have up until the very last day, right, before the opinion is released, to actually cast those votes. So who knows what else is up for that horse trade? So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, we haven't even touched on the issue of, comprehensive sexual education in schools even, right? And in a lot of these states like Mississippi, children don't have an opportunity to learn. And so on the one hand, you're not teaching them how to be safe and how to make, better decisions when it comes, or make responsible decisions about their bodies and about their behaviors. But there's this expectation that they're going to follow through and just have children, right? And so it's this perpetuation of trauma and generational poverty. And, again, it's very difficult not to take these things very personally, because you take a state like Mississippi, for example, where approximately about, 42% of the population is Black. However, 81%, just around that number, of folks accessing abortion services are Black, right? So again, when we think about health disparities, it's not just about the issues that we see on the ground, but it's really a comparison of who lives here and who actually needs these services. And that, that conversation is very heartbreaking, because, even before we really understand and begin to talk about the longer term and consequences and impacts of this, we already know who is going to be impacted.
One of my colleagues, when I told her that we were going to be discussing Roe versus Wade, she was concerned about the men making the decision, And she said, many of them probably don't know how a woman's body works. What is your response to that? She said, there are many women who don't even know that they're pregnant. How do you address that, Shirley?
I mean, so again, a lot of this goes back to, access to health, but also health literacy, right? So if from a very young age, you're in a system that doesn't support your education, whether it's fundamental, at the level of like math and science, all the way down to, life skills and reproductive health, of course, you're at a disadvantage, right? You're not going to know how parts of your body work. You may not understand when you're pregnant, or what that even means if you're a child who, for example, has just been molested, or you're experiencing incest or rape, right? So again, this is very intricate, and it's unfortunate that, we don't talk about, all of the different nuances, and that these issues are often just kind of clumped together and bucketed together. But I would say that I agreed 100%. I've seen a meme, on social media that said, if men were victims, if you will, of these conversations, or if men were the ones who were accessing abortion services, they'd probably be able to access it at a gas station without a problem, right? And so it's difficult to, you laugh about those issues, but sometimes you sit and you wonder, right? Like, why is it that a lot of these issues are at the expense of women's needs, and at the expense of women's health, and their expense of women's bodies? And why is it that the government feels that it's okay to constantly police the bodies of women without consequence, right? And that's also an important conversation for us to have, not only, I think, publicly in our communities, but also within our households. And at some point, I'm not a parent, but, I do have conversations with my cousins and my younger nieces and nephews about, issues like consent and, how their bodies work and things like that, because these are issues that affect not only individuals, but families and communities. And I think we have to have these conversations not only with our young women, but also with our young boys and just young people in general, right? Young people who are experimenting, young people who are curious about their bodies, young people who are beginning to make decisions about what they want to do with their bodies, because even though women seem to be the target, we're all impacted. And so we have to begin to address these issues as families and communities.
Yeah,
well, we're almost running out of time, but Dr. Reverend Thornton, continue. Yeah. But I also was going to ask you, what is the church and church leaders doing about this?
Well, I think that, number one, we are having a lot of conversation about it, because I think from a religious perspective, we have to be objective. And we have to look at what would Jesus do? And the reality of the matter is that I think that we have not put enough responsibility on the boys or on men. There's a double standard that women are supposed to behave a certain way, but men, it's okay if they impregnate the woman, but then they don't have to take responsibility for it. And then men cannot get pregnant. And so this is a conversation that we have often with our young men, to say that you also share responsibility in this, and in fact should be held accountable.
We're running out of time.
Okay.
Dr. Blair, you're last. And
Well,
how do you hold elected officials to task?
Okay, so to answer your question, to hold elected officials to task, when we get to the states, and we will get to the states, to ensure that we increase the rights of women, that we ensure that our healthcare laws are not under attack, when it comes to abortion, to ensure that, that schools are funded to put in place or to fund these health centers, right? That they really have the nurses and the social workers, et cetera, in place to deal with some of these issues, because there will be. And for single parent households, right? To ensure that, we don't have a return to an increase in child poverty or family poverty, that we don't roll back the clock, because then it's an attack on the welfare state, it's an attack on unemployment insurance, it's an attack on food stamps, you name it, it will go right down the line. So yeah, to ensure that those rights are protected.
I want to thank all of you for participating in this discussion. Dr. Zulema Blair, Reverend James Thornton, and Ms. Shirley Torho. Thank you very much. I believe this says that we should do a part 2 at some point or other, but let's wait and see what the justices are going to decide. And then we'll come back and continue this discussion. Thank you very much for being with Brooklyn 45.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
And I also want to thank you, our viewers, for watching this program. As we always do, we invite you to partner with Brooklyn 45. You can do this in many ways. You can suggest topics for us to discuss, and you can also become a supporter. We are a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, and when you support us, our communities benefit, and so do you. So please tell everyone you know on social media about us, and please, please, please support us. On behalf of our Brooklyn 45 team, I am Sam Taitt.